Hey, welcome back to part 2 of Genesis 1:1 in the beginning. The first part we covered time, space, and matter, and we introduced the most famous, if not the most profound, 7 words ever, which is Genesis 1:1, or as Bereshit 1:1. And we'll go over them here. Bereshit, bara, Elohim, et, hashemayim, va'et, haaretz. Now, before we get into some of the nuts and bolts of this and all that God has hidden in there, I want to introduce you just to some very basic Hebrew alphabet. And don't worry about the word gematria. That's another level of Genesis 1:1 we'll get to soon. But there's 22 letters in their alphabet. And we're going to talk about a few of them. Aleph is the first. Bet, we've already talked about bet. In fact, we get the word, the alphabet comes from the Aleph bet, the first 2 letters of Hebrew. Gimel is the third. We've already talked about a vav. Remember in the 6th word there, it's va'et. The vav, it looks like a nail. It's the Hebrew word for nail, and it means nail. And it's nails connect, and. We talked about the mem. If it ends in M, it's plural, 3 or more. And we've talked about the lamed. It's the tallest of the Hebrew letters. And 2 others we want to introduce today is the resh and the ta. We did talk about the ta. It's the last of the Hebrew letters. So, there they are, 22 letters. Jesus, what does your name begin with? Oh, yes, the Yud. There's the Yud. Really, this is the smallest letter. It's not an apostrophe. It's a very small letter. When Jesus in the New Testament said, don't change so much as a jot or a tittle, he didn't say jot. He said a Yud. Don't even change the smallest letter because it will affect everything, as you will see. So let's look at the Hebrew alphabet. Just the first 3, very easy. Sort of the ABC here. Here's the Aleph. And in Hebrew, each Hebrew letter has a picture associated with it historically or ancient times. Okay? So the Aleph, it was originally, its shape was the head of an ox. And you can see the snout, and you have 2 ears and 2 horns. This is an Aleph. It's this, and it represents the strength. Okay? Followed by the bait. And here's the ancient picture of a bait. A bait looks like a tent. And the word bait and the letter bait represents a house. You've probably heard of it. You have heard of it. Here, do you know what this is? In Hebrew, this, lechem, bread. And if you have Beit Lechem, that's Bethlehem. Anyone here born in Bethlehem? Yes. I am. Yahweh. Yahweh said he was. Anyway, so Beit is a tent or a house. Gimel is, it looks like a man walking away from the house to do good deeds. And that's ancient picture. It could be a man walking. It could be also a camel. The Hebrew word for camel is gamal. It's the long neck, and there's some parallels there. We're not going to cover gamal today, or gimel. But you can see, like on the bait, if we spin this, that's where we get our letter B, right? And the same with the Aleph. If you spin that in your head, you can see that it would be the letter A. Okay, but it's originally just a head of an ox. But it represents the strength. Remember that. Now, here's another little board here that's gives you an example of this. Here you have this much right here is a Hebrew word, Aleph Beit. It's pronounced Abba. It's the word. Well, let's figure out what it means. This is the strength because it's the Aleph, it's the head of the ox, the strength, and a beit is a house or a tent. So the strength of the tent, that's an Abba, that's the Father. And that's the word. In Mark, Jesus is praying and he says, Abba, Father. He's asking about letting the cup pass. So we see there's a word there. Interesting, this much is a word. The first, the two middle, the beit and the resh. And we haven't talked about a resh yet, but its ancient picture is a head. Here, a head. Looking in this direction. Hebrew goes in this direction. So the letters go in that direction. So if the ancient picture of a resh is a picture of a head, imagine turning that head around, looking the other direction, putting legs on it, and you have the letter R that we currently use. Think of resh as head. You'll hear it in the Rosh Hashanah. That's the new year, or since it's Rosh Hashanah, it's head of the year. Rosh, head. Okay? So, if we know resh is head, then we have a word right here. Those two middle ones, a beit and a resh. Beit resh comes out to be bar. And you've heard the word bar before in a bar mitzvah. And what is a bar? Well, it is the head of the tent, or head of the house. And that would be the son. Very clever. He's got the father here, he's got the son here. We already learned the mem, if it ends in M, that means three or more. We already talked about that. So here you have Abram. This is before God changed his name, but it's Abram. That's father of sons many. And that was his promise that God made him. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. But you can see how all this ties together so beautifully. So, if we go to Genesis 1, we see it starts out Bereshit. It's a beit, a resh, and an aleph. And then the second word is also a beit, a resh, and an aleph. Well, we know beit resh, that much alone is bar, that's son. And then there's aleph. Aleph is God. So you have son of God, and in the second word you have beit resh, son of God. He starts out the Bible saying son of God, son of God. And he starts with a beit. Why doesn't he start with aleph? If God, that's his letter, the aleph. But he doesn't start his Bible with an aleph, he starts it with a beit. And beit also is used as an abbreviation to mean son. You've heard it in the first president of Israel was David Ben Gurion. They would abbreviate Ben as with a beit. So he starts out with a beit. He's pointing to the son. He says, son of God, son of God. And he starts out with a beit. If you look at the beit, notice it's closed to infinity past. Aleph is in infinity past. Now things start. It's also closed to things above heaven. It's also closed to things below the earth. We are to go that way. It's open to infinity that way. Very, very clever. All the minutia that God puts, every letter, how it's all going to fit. In all these words like Aleph Beit, meaning Abba, the strength of the tent. All Hebrew words do this. It's unbelievably cool. It had to be written by someone outside of our time and space. It just had to be. Anyway, we'll see you back here in part 3 in just a moment. Let's recap first. Okay. What a relief. I don't want my pens drying out. See you soon.